So you are from America's Test Kitchen,
That's right.
Cook's Country, and you guys dig into the ingredients and the recipes, but also the science behind the food.
That's right.
But in this case, for beer, I hear you're also a home brewer?
That's right, about 20 years.
Wow.
We've really picked it up, my husband and I, over the past 5 years. So we've got a lot of beer in our basement, and we're brewing all different styles now.
So why your interest, or I guess better yet, why this interest from everybody sort of in terms of growing our own and brewing our own? Where does that come from?
Well, we're curious. We want to know what's going on. We want to know the ingredients that are going into all of our foods. That's why we're baking bread, making beer, and other things, growing vegetables at home. And also we like to see the process of going from grain to beer at the very end. Cracking open a beer that you've made yourself is pretty sweet.
All right, well, I'm curious about the history of beer because it has really been around, I mean, almost forever, right?
3500 BC in Mesopotamia is the first mention of any type of beer-like beverage.
Wow.
And it probably happened naturally. A little bit of bread was mixed with water, grab some yeast spores from the air, you get fermentation. So, and it was very thick. People drank it through a straw, kind of gross, but it would leave all of that sediment far behind. And these are three, here are ales. Now these are more modern ales. We're not going to have to drink these through a straw.
Right.
Now ale yeast is what separates this from lagers, which we'll get to in just a moment.
So ales and lagers, those
That's
are
right.
two categories of
That's the
beer.
two
That's
categories.
basically everything falls into one of the two?
That's right, yeah.
All right.
So ale yeast is a top fermenting yeast. That means that you'll see some of that yeast rise to the top and it'll get little bubbles on it.
Right.
Ale likes to be brewed at a pretty warm temperature, so 60 to 75 is a pretty natural range.
Okay.
And ale has kind of very nice flavor. It's very round. You'll see it often described as floral or bitter.
Right.
Yeah.
You can smell it's the hops as part
That's
of that
right.
ingredient. It really gives it that sort of flowery smell.
Yeah, you should really get it from that one.
Okay, so those are in the ales.
That's right. Now, for these three, this is an American pale ale. And the British are actually the founders of the pale ale, but Americans started brewing it in the 1980s when we also started growing our own hops. Now, this is pale ale's cousin. That is an IPA, or an India pale ale. And that's a beer that's born out of necessity. The British had to figure out a way to get their pale ale from Great Britain all the way to India so that it survives the journey. So they packed it full of hops, and that acted as a preservative, but it also gives tons of that bitter and floral flavor and aroma.
So this one I think of as a stout, but you're saying that it's technically an ale.
That's right. It uses an ale yeast, so it is an ale. Porter is very similar. Now, stouts were made in the 1700s in England and in Ireland, and the difference is the type of grain that's used, very dark. So you have chocolate malts, barley that's toasted or roasted, and you also have brown malts. So you get that kind of caramelly sweetness.
And then the lagers, what distinguishes them from the ales?
So it uses a lager yeast. That is the main
Different yeast.
difference.
Okay.
And it's also bottom fermenting, so you don't have that push up to the top of the bubbles. Lager likes a nice cold temperature when it's fermenting, so don't we all? 45 to 55 degrees is the absolute max, and it takes longer to make a lager because cold does slow down the
That's
fermentation.
interesting. So this one, even though it's clear, very familiar to us, actually is harder to make because we want the cold and it takes
That's right.
longer.
Yeah, that's exactly right.